Good day, peasants. I made a promise to Captain Wave to educate him on the sordid history of Spiderman, since it is his favourite character among the miserable superheroes that no one cares about. The year was 1962. Marvel Comics was little more than a peddler of pedestrian monster drivel and insipid romance tales. Mr. Stan Lee, allegedly suffering from a bout of creative desperation, claims he found his grand inspiration by watching a fly crawling on a wall. Yes, you heard me correctly. A literal household pest. While a creature of my noble stature would gracefully ignore such vermin, a human stares at a fly and thinks, "Ah, what a magnificent template for a champion of justice." It is quite frankly appalling. There is simply no otter way to describe how utterly uninspired your species truly is. Stan Lee, armed with this tragically flawed concept, scurried into the office of his publisher, Martin Goodman. Lee pitched a hero with the proportionate traits of an arachnid. But wait, it gets worse. This hero was not a distinguished gentleman of wealth and taste, but rather a painfully awkward, impoverished teenager absolutely riddled with neuroses, social inadequacies, and allergy issues. Bloody hell, he essentially pitched the autobiography of your average internet commenter. Goodman, in a rare, fleeting moment of human clarity, utterly despised the idea. He bluntly informed Lee that people naturally abhor spiders, and that teenagers are strictly relegated to being subservient, pathetic sidekicks, not leading men. Why anyone would wish to spend their precious time reading about a whining adolescent incapable of managing his own finances is entirely beyond me. The entire premise was absolute rubbish. However, as is so painfully typical with human endeavours, sheer dumb luck and apathy intervened. Marvel possessed a failing publication titled Amazing Fantasy. The magazine was bleeding money, a catastrophic commercial failure slated for immediate cancellation with its 15th issue. Because it was already a dying magazine, Goodman simply could not be bothered to care what went inside it. He threw his hands up in defeat and permitted Lee to dump his pathetic, angsty Spider-Boy into the final pages of the doomed comic, fully expecting it to sink into the abyss of forgotten literature where it so rightly belonged. And there you have it. The majestic, highly revered genesis of your greatest cultural icon was nothing more than a rejected, poorly conceived idea tossed unceremoniously into a glorified rubbish bin of a magazine because the publisher was too apathetic to stop it. It is a testament to the appalling mediocrity of human history. Having secured a spot in the doomed Amazing Fantasy number 15, Mr. Stan Lee now needed someone to actually draw his neurotic, fly-inspired monstrosity. Naturally, he approached Marvel's premier artist, Jack Kirby. Now Kirby, presumably running on fumes and a gross misunderstanding of the assignment, drafted a character that was far too muscular, far too heroic, and wielding a magic ring alongside a web gun. A magic ring. Absolute rubbish. It completely missed the point of the pathetic, scrawny weakling Lee had so desperately envisioned. Lee, throwing what I can only assume was a rather ungraceful human tantrum, immediately scrapped Kirby's 5-page draft. He unceremoniously tossed it into the bin and summoned Steve Ditko. Ditko, bless his highly eccentric and reclusive soul, actually understood the assignment. He managed to perfectly capture the sheer, unadulterated awkwardness and physical inferiority of Peter Parker. It was Ditko who conceived the full-face mask. A brilliant maneuver, really, because subjecting the public to the acne-ridden, miserable visage of a sulking teenager would have been, quite frankly, appalling. But, of course, the creation of this character could not merely be a collaborative triumph. It had to devolve into a pathetic display of human ego. For decades, The infantile bickering over who truly birthed Spiderman has been enough to make a refined aristocrat such as myself sick to my stomach. Lee paraded around claiming the initial concept and the dialogue. Ditko quite rightfully argued that he designed the costume, the web shooters, and did all the actual narrative-heavy lifting while Lee was busy taking the credit. And Kirby, despite his initial draft being entirely rejected, later crawled out of the woodwork to claim that he had given Lee the original idea in the first place based on an old, defunct character of his called the Silver Spider. Bloody hell. Watching grown men fight over the parentage of a fictional teenager in a spandex onesie is like watching a pack of feral seagulls violently skirmish over a single discarded chip on a Brighton pier. There is simply no odder explanation for such grotesque pettiness than the fragile, insecure nature of the human male. Nobody wants to take the blame for a failure, but the moment you commoners decide to blindly consume the drivel they produce, everyone suddenly demands a crown. In August of 1962, Amazing Fantasy No. 15 was unceremoniously dumped onto the newsstands. It contained the debut of this wretched, wall-crawling adolescent. By all laws of logic, good taste, and literary decency, this issue should have been the final nail in a well-deserved obscure coffin. The character was agonizingly pathetic, the premise was absurd, and the execution was dripping with the kind of teenage melodrama that I find quite frankly appalling. Yet what happened next is a grim testament to the catastrophic state of the human condition. Did the masses reject this drivel? Did they demand heroes of nobility, refinement, and aristocratic grace? Bloody hell, of course they didn't. They devoured it. The public saw their own miserable, inadequate reflections in this perpetually impoverished, whiny boy, and they crowned him their new king. It is sickening. When the sales figures returned, to the shock of absolutely everyone possessing a shred of dignity, the issue was a monumental, record-breaking financial triumph. Martin Goodman, demonstrating the absolute lack of spine and principles so characteristic of corporate executives, immediately backpedaled. The very man who had previously declared the idea absolute rubbish suddenly demanded an ongoing solo series. Thus, The Amazing Spider-Man was hastily rushed into production to capitalize on your collective lack of standards. Now, decades later, we must continue to suffer the consequences of this historical blunder. This utterly flawed creation has inexplicably become the cornerstone of a multi-billion-dollar global empire. You cannot walk down a street without being accosted by his garish red and blue visage plastered on cinema screens, bedsheets, and insipid plastic toys. It proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that humanity's collective taste will forever remain securely fastened in the gutter. I would expect nothing odder from a species that actively celebrates its own mediocrity. I am completely finished with this subject. My superior brain demands immediate sanctuary from your cultural poverty. I shall return to my uncompromisingly bitter black coffee, my PlayStation 1 games, and the quiet, elevated solitude that only a royal white otter can truly appreciate. Do not dare ask me to recount another of your tragic comic book histories. Cheerio.